An up and down weekend leads us into deadline week. Let's have some fun talking trades and recapping the Sabres weekend coming up here in the Locked On Sabres podcast.
Your Locked On Sabres, your daily podcast on the Buffalo Sabres. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And thanks for making Locked On Sabres your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is presented by FanDuel. Make every moment more right now. New customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. The Sabres go 1-1 over the weekend. Not enough to get back into at least decent shape in the playoff race. They remain 10 points out of the playoffs. A win against the Golden Knights, a thrilling game at home, followed by a deflating loss to the Winnipeg Jets. We'll talk about it. And I've got some deadline stuff to get to. We have Kevin Adams talking to Paul Hamilton and Brian Koziel, dropping some tidbits about the deadline. We have Elliot Friedman discussing Kyle Okposo again. I've got an Okposo trade idea for you that I think is realistic for Friday's deadline. And Casey Mittelstadt on what Adams said about Mittelstadt, a little bit of an update, and why I think there is a different hockey trade that is more likely to happen this week for the Sabres than Mittelstadt for a defenseman, which is a deal that we've talked about really almost the entirety of the season. All that coming up here on the Locked On Sabres podcast. If you want to get involved in the show, be sure to join our Locked On Sabres text line. You can become a sortie today by going to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnSabres. One thing we were discussing in the group chat this morning was the idea of Brady Tkachuk as a trade idea. We've talked about what the Panthers did to get Matthew Tkachuk a couple of years ago and how it ignited their run to Stanley Cup contention. Well, Brady Tkachuk, there are rumors about him in Ottawa, and we'll maybe spend more time on him on a future show because it's not that likely of an idea at all. I mean, it's a comet flying across the sky, but I do think it's an interesting idea to talk about even in theory. So we got a little bit of that. Go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnSabres and you can participate. Before we get to any deadline stuff, any trade stuff, the weekend. I went to the Sabre game on Saturday night against the Golden Knights, and even though Jack Eichel did not play, which would have been cool, the atmosphere would have been buzzing, even though he won a Stanley Cup and even though he's already been back twice. I just think you get that little extra juice when Eichel would be back in the building. You had a pretty full crowd, 17,000 fans in attendance. There were a good amount of Golden Knights fans, but those are all Penguins fans from between 2009 and 2016. All those bandwagon Penguin fans that have seen the Penguins get bad, all they did was jump ship and go over to Vegas. None of them have actually been to Vegas, is my prediction. The Golden Helmet sitting in Section 108 in particular. But anyways, Golden Knights, Sabres, a marquee opponent, the defending Stanley Cup champs. You got a Saturday night. The Sabres are wearing the black and red. I had a buddy in town who had not been to a game. He had been to a game in December, but he hadn't been to a win in a really long time. And how could you have gotten a more entertaining game? I mean, for me, and I've gone to probably like half the home games this year, maybe a little less than half the home games. But it's probably about half, about 15 home games this year. And I think that was the most entertaining game I've been to all year. It's hard to beat it. You got a marquee team. The Sabres scored 7 goals. They earned all 7 of them. They were far and away the better team from pretty much beginning to end. They had a rough 4-minute stretch early on in the second period, right after Dylan Cousins scored his shorthanded goal. The Golden Knights took over a little bit. But for the other 56 minutes, I thought it was dominated by the Sabres. They outshot the Golden Knights 35-24 in the game. I do think the Sabres benefited from some horrific goaltending by Logan Thompson. I thought he was very, very tough to watch on the night. So you had some benefit there. 2 shorthanded goals by Dylan Cousins. A little bit of luck needed in that. The first one, though, I will say Cousins was unbelievable. Outskating a guy, kicking the puck up to his stick, not losing speed, and able to finish the goal to make it 2-0. Beginning to end, the Sabres were just fantastic. So a great win. You got a fight at the end of the game. Peyton Krebs, who, again, relegated to a fourth-line role. Look at Peyton Krebs embracing it, though. He'll be the tough guy if he needs to be, fighting a guy in Ivan Barbashev that is at least a little bit taller than he is. So they got that win, and it's okay. They're flying high. They're still playing well. They've won whatever it was, 5 of their last 6. And all right, go win on Sunday. And we're in single digits. We're in single digits heading into deadline week. Maybe they can cut it to 6. Maybe 5, maybe even 4 if they're really lucky, and we can have a real conversation here about making a run to the postseason. So then we get to Sunday. Luukkonen started Saturday against Vegas, played pretty well, didn't have a lot of work against him. And I said actually in the third period, I texted this in our group chat, it was about 12 minutes to go, I think, in the third period, and I said at that point it was 6-2 Sabres. 5-2 Sabres. Get Luukkonen out of the net now. Give him as much rest as possible so that he's ready to go for Sunday night against the Winnipeg Jets. They didn't obviously do that, but they did decide to start him on Sunday anyways. Eric Comrie, not going to be a part of the rotation. Maybe he gets a game this week as another back-to-back comes Wednesday and Thursday. But for Sunday's game against Winnipeg, even though it was his former team, no Eric Comrie. No call-up for Devin Levi. No Dustin Tokarski. They're going back to Luukkonen. And it's hard to blame them. He had played 18 to 19 games. He's been unbelievable. He played pretty well against Vegas, even though he wasn't tested a lot. So go right back to him. Let him get the opportunity to play back-to-back. So they do that. And I don't think there is any criticism that's deserved towards Granato for making that decision. So here they go against Winnipeg. They were definitely tired. They at least looked that way. They looked emotionally spent. They looked like they didn't have their legs. But because this year's Sabre team is a little bit better defensively than last year, I pointed out the numbers last week that last year the Sabres gave up, they were 28th in the league in high danger chances given up, in 28th from the top, which means they were really bad. And this year they're 19th, a little bit closer to the middle of the pack. They are a better defensive team, and they have a very, very good goaltender. So this year, on a night where they don't have their legs, where the shot attempts after the first 40 minutes of play were far and away in Winnipeg's favor, the Jets kind of controlled the game, I thought, for most of it. A lot of chances in front of the net. Sabres didn't have a lot. The Sabres, though, are still in there. 10 minutes to go, up 2-1. Hanging tough. 1 goal from the power play early on. Sabres power play has been playing really well. 5 of their last 10 in the last week and a half. They get a goal from Eric Robinson. There's my boy Peyton Krebs with a great setup to a fourth-line guy. Finally gets someone to bury it for him. Zemgus Girgensons, by the way, records his first assist of the season, which is incredible that it's possible. And it's 2-1, halfway through the third period. And Luukkonen's playing great. He's stopping a bunch of chances. The Sabres look tired, but okay, maybe they're going to get through this. And then, does the energy run out for Luukkonen? Is that what happened? Josh Morrissey cuts in on goal. Great scoring chance. Luukkonen got a piece of it, but it was just a sloppy play technically from him because he ends up in his own net. Like, there's no way you're stopping that puck when you yourself are sliding back into the net. Then 3 minutes later, here comes Morgan Barron, who's not a great player, 9 goals on the season. He's coming in one-on-one with Owen Power. Power's taking the middle away. All you're going to get here is a wrist shot from the faceoff circle from a guy that scored 9 goals all year, and it beats Luukkonen. Those are 2 goals that I think UPL would want back. Now, to be fair, I'm not pinning the loss on UPL because otherwise, I thought he was pretty darn good, especially playing a back-to-back. The Sabres got outplayed. They deserved to lose that hockey game. But it is definitely true that Luukkonen's going to want those third and fourth goals back, and then you get 2 empty netters to end it. So really tough, right? Like, what are you going to do? Jets are a good hockey team, although they didn't have their starting goaltender. Connor Hellebuck did not play in this game. It was Laurent Brossoit in net. You'd love to have pulled that out. You get to this point in the season. You're tired. It's 2-1, 10 minutes to go in the third. You at least got to get that game to overtime, because the Sabres, as we've talked about this year, have almost no loser points. And I know that's not necessarily a great indication of how good a team you are, but it matters to making the playoffs. The Sabres have 4 loser points on the season. The Islanders, for comparison, have 14. 14. If the Sabres had 4 more loser points than they do right now, then we'd be talking about them being in the race. 6 points out in the race, right? You might not be in great shape. That's a game, 10 minutes to go. You got to get to OT. And by the way, it's the first game in 2 seasons that the Sabres have had the lead after 2 periods of hockey and lost the game in regulation. They were 46-0-5 going into the night, and now they are 46-1-5 in situations where they lead after 40 minutes of play. They get the loss, deflating, crushing. Well, it probably doesn't change much for the deadline, though. We're into deadline week. Elliot Friedman, Kevin Adams. I've got some trade ideas. Let's get to some of that when we come back here on the Locked On Sabres podcast. We are presented by FanDuel Sportsbook. A lot of good hockey going on right now. It's not just the Sabres. There's a bunch available to you on FanDuel around the National Hockey League. And plus, you've got the NBA entering their final stretch of the regular season, too. Get buckets with your first bet on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers get $150 of bonus bets with any $5 bet. It's $150 if your bet wins. Bet on all your favorite NBA players and teams with quick bets, live same-game parlays, exclusive props. I've been looking a lot of championship futures lately, and plenty more. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and shoot your shot. FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NBA. Back here on the Locked On Sabres podcast, it is deadline week, but it's also a lot going on in the NBA and in the PGA Tour as well. NFL, of course, Combine Week. Check out Locked On Sports Today. They're covering it all. The first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and it's now available on Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app as well. Sabres lose to the Jets after beating the Golden Knights. They are next in action Wednesday night and then Thursday night. Toronto and Nashville on a back-to-back. We'll talk later in the week about what they'll do in net, because I think that's going to be a very interesting situation to see what they do. Deadline week. Okay, so a couple of tidbits. We've got Elliot Friedman, 32 thoughts that says, kind of from the inside, if you will, on what we're looking at behind the scenes, that Kevin Adams is letting other NHL GMs know he is not afraid to make a large deal. And that's good. I would have liked to assume that was true. I guess it's good to hear. The only thing I guess I don't like about hearing that in the media is that makes me think that the PR machines work. I don't want that to be true, and I hope it's not. I do believe Kevin Adams' intentions are genuine, that he does want to complete a large hockey deal, a hockey trade. But he might also be realistic. He knows the situation they're in, and he might have a hard time convincing players to come here. And he might have a hard time getting other GMs to get on the hook, especially too. And he's just setting everybody up for, hey guys, if we don't do something, just know I tried. Don't blame me. You got to have a dance partner. A little bit of that PR machine, I'm really hoping isn't the case, but I'm wondering if that is what's at work here. But either way, I got to believe that it's true that Adams is actually trying to get that deal done behind the scenes. What it is, what type of deal, pick some prospects out the door for a player back. That's what he said with Brian Koziel and Paul Hamilton on WGR over the weekend. He literally said, when talking about the deadline, hey, we got to pick some prospects like to ship out. Like he didn't say ship out, but he definitely implied that hey, we got all this stuff. We want to cash it. We start cashing it in a little bit, cashing in some of our chips. He also made another effort to point out that he's not shopping Casey Mittelstadt. I just have to say, I think that's completely irrelevant, whether they're shopping Casey Mittelstadt or not. I don't think GMs anywhere really shop guys. If you have a player that's good, you don't have to shop him. The interest will come to you. If the league knows Casey Mittelstadt's available and another GM wants Casey Mittelstadt bad enough to trade for him, it's 2024. I don't think you have to pick up the phone and let that GM know. I think things get out, league circles talk, and you can find a deal without having to call every general manager in the NHL. I don't think it matters whether they're shopping him or not. Would they trade him? And do they want to trade him? That to me is what is important. And I still land on there's no way they don't want to trade him. There's no way. I know they say they want to sign him. I think that's another thing where you can't really alienate the player by letting everyone know they want to trade him, because if you can't trade him, then you're going to have to sign him to a deal. I got to think, though, with the current build of the roster, they know that the best thing for the team is a hockey trade, Mittelstadt out for a top 4 defenseman. So there's that. We'll get to more on Mittelstadt, though, coming up in the third segment. The other stuff that we have, Adam's talking about Okposo, Girgensons, Eric Johnson, and I guess to a lesser extent, Victor Olofsson, who I keep forgetting is even on the team because he's not playing, and I haven't really thought about him a lot lately, other than it's unbelievable he's still on the roster. All these guys I expect to be traded, except maybe Olofsson, because I don't even know that anybody wants him. You could offer him up for future considerations, and I'm not sure anybody would take him, especially at that salary. Sabres have to take half of it, I would bet. So you have Okposo, you have Johnson, you have Girgensons. I do believe Johnson and Girgensons will get moved, and you probably won't get a ton back for them. Okposo, I also believe will get moved, and I just want to continue to throw it out there. I think we might be surprised on Friday if Okposo gets traded for how much he gets traded for. I don't want to predict it. I would still predict we're talking about a mid-round pick for Okposo. But I do think there's a chance that everyone is shocked and awed because Kyle Okposo got traded for a second-round pick. Here's why. One, the league is starting to recognize late firsts even, but especially seconds and thirds, aren't as valuable as you thought they were. Those players don't often make the NHL at all, let alone become star players. Okposo is on a 17-goal pace. He's a captain, veteran leader, penalty kill, power play. In a pinch, you can play him in the top 6, although I don't really think you can, but GMs might think that. A lot of dumb trades get made at the deadline. Barclay Goodrow is an example of this. Barclay Goodrow was a bottom 6 forward who had single-digit goals for the San Jose Sharks a couple of years ago. And at the trade deadline, he had 8 goals and 16 assists in 62 games in 1920. And the Lightning acquired him for a first. They sent a first-round pick away because bottom 6 guy plays all situations and had a low salary. That's kind of Okposo, but with Okposo, you might even get on top of that all the veteran leadership stuff. I think second-round pick is realistic for Okposo, despite the fact I'd still probably want to predict like a 4th. But I think it's possible. GMs make some dumb trades, and I think anything could happen at this deadline when it comes to a player like Okposo, especially when he's scoring a couple of goals here and there. All right, when we come back, more on Mittelstadt, and there's a hockey trade I think is more likely to be made by the Sabres this week than a Mittelstadt hockey trade. I'll let you know what that is when we come back here on the Locked On Sabres podcast. We are presented by Game Time. Game Time, the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater near you. They got killer last-minute deals, all in prices. My favorite is the views from your seat. You're scrolling through, looking for what you want. They have the picture right there of exactly what you're going to be looking at, your angle, how high up you are, and whatnot. Get their best price guarantee. Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. Game Time, the only ticketing app that gives you peace of mind with your purchase. All-in prices show your total up front, so you know you're getting a great deal before you check out. Buy tickets in seconds with just 2 taps. With zone deals, you pick the section, Game Time picks the seats for big time savings, and the Game Time guarantee means you'll always get the best price. If you find tickets in the same section and row for less, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code Locked On for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code Locked On for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Final segment here on the Locked On Sabres podcast. Thanks for making us your first listen. Deadline week, Friday at, I believe, 4 o'clock. I should know that off the top of my head. But we got a Friday afternoon deadline, per usual. And Casey Mittelstadt expected to be someone that we're thinking about throughout the week. Adams says he's not shopping him. Says he still like to sign him. That's the intention. I still think it makes a lot of sense to move him. And I think that Adams knows that. I'll say this, though. We've talked about this, how it's hard to get veterans to come to Buffalo, and it's hard to make a hockey trade involving veterans in the NHL at the deadline. Because the Sabres, if they wanted to trade Mittelstadt now for a top 4 defenseman, we'll use my guy Rasmus Andersson, for example. If you want to trade a guy to a team that's going to make the playoffs, who likes Mittelstadt, they're not going to want to give you a guy that's playing 22 minutes a night on their blue line. They're just not going to want to do it. So you're really limited to dealing with teams that are not in the playoff hunt. So you're cutting off like half or maybe even more than half the league when it comes to a Mittelstadt hockey trade. A deal I think is more likely because of that. I think Mittelstadt is more of a summer trade. A deal that could be worked at the deadline, though, is similar to a deadline deal that was made by the Sabres a little over a decade ago that we'll remember well, was a big trade when it happened. Not going to say it really worked out great for either side, but it was a big trade at the time. It was a hockey trade, position for position, that was made at the prospect level or the near prospect level. About a decade ago, the Sabres traded Zach Kassian, along with Marc-Andre Grignani, for Cody Hodgson and Alex Sulzer. Let's eliminate the token defenseman for defenseman swap part of that deal. Hodgson, Kassian. The Sabres, at that point in time, had a lot of wingers. They had Vanek, they had Pominville, they had Stafford, they still have a Finnegan off at that time. Probably he might have been gone. But whatever. They had wingers. Tyler Ennis, they would have had at that point in time. Marcus Foligno was in the system and remember it showed up and played well. Was at the World Juniors. So Kassian, another winger. Well, we've got a lot of wingers. What we don't have is a number one center. The Sabres were desperately searching for years for a replacement for Briere and Drury. At least we were. Maybe Darcy wasn't. He was kind of content with Rowan Connolly. Either way, Cody Hodgson, a center, young center, who had played some with Vancouver, but had not yet reached his peak, we did not know what his potential was. At that point in time, he had only played 70 games total for Vancouver, 17 goals and 18 assists. So not bad, first round pick, kind of a rookie. That was a deal that was just position for position. The Canucks probably had the Sedin still at center and Ryan Kessler. They didn't need another center. They needed another winger. The Sabres needed a center. We'll give you our winger for your center. Perfect. Hockey trade. But it happened at the prospect level. That's the type of deal I see as being more likely for the Sabres right now. They have a surplus of forward prospects. And trading, even if it was 1-for-1, if there was some other piece involved, whatever. But a prospect trade or a near-level prospect trade, guy that maybe is a rookie for a guy that's just about to crack the NHL, forward for defenseman. That is the deal that makes a lot of sense. I think it's easier to get that deal done because you don't have to deal as much with, does this guy want to come here? Does he have a no trade clause? When you're dealing with prospects, you don't have to worry about that. There are no trade clauses. And most times those guys aren't going to put up a fight about where they're going because they're too young at that point to even care about it. They're just trying to make the league. So That's an easier deal to accomplish, I think, when it comes to the personality. So let's circle back to a name we've talked about. David Jiricek. He was unhappy in Columbus. They're probably going to have a new GM and coach, and maybe that matters to this equation, but he's been unhappy in Columbus. So I've mentioned this deal before, but one that I think might be more likely than a Mittelstadt trade is why not Matt Savoy for David Jiricek? Why not? Columbus gets out of a guy that's been unhappy, and they trade him for a guy that only went 3 picks after Jiricek did 2 years ago in the NHL draft. So it'd almost be like they just drafted Savoy instead. That's no shame. There's no shame in that. He could have easily went 6th overall that draft. He only went a couple picks after. The Sabres, meanwhile, and Columbus is in need of more skilled centers and forwards. I mean, Savoy easily could develop into a top 6 center in Columbus, and they could use that totally. Columbus kind of needs everything, though. The Sabres, meanwhile, it's a dream for them because they already got Kulik, they got Roseanne, they got Oslin, they got Krebs who can't crack the top 9. They would be keeping Mittelstadt maybe in that equation. You've got forwards, you've got the depth. You don't need Savoy. It'd be nice, but you don't need him. You need defensemen. You need another great young defenseman that could step in on your top 4. Oh, and by the way, he's a right shot, which is really nice too. So that's a trade I think is easier to accomplish than a Mittelstadt trade is. And that's why, especially at the deadline, I think that's a deal that's more likely for the Buffalo Sabres. A prospect for prospect hockey trade rather than an NHLer for an NHLer. And that's my idea for the Sabres. Join subtext.com/LockedOnSabres. If you're not a part of our Locked On Sabres group chat and you want to get involved, talk trade this week. We'll be keeping you updated throughout the week on all the rumors, all the Friedman stuff. He'll have his, rumors throughout the week. Jeff Merrick's of the world, LeBron's, watching all the insiders as closely as possible over the next couple of days. And any scoops I have, I'm always willing to pass along to our texters. All right, so that's going to do it for us. We got a big week coming up. Wednesday, Thursday, game schedule. Toronto and then Nashville. We'll see what we get from Luukkonen, whether he'll play both games again, or maybe they'll call up Devin Levi, or maybe they'll go with Comrie. And then the deadline on Friday. All right, that's it for us. Thanks, everybody, for listening. Be sure to check out Locked On Sports Today, the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and it's now available on Amazon Fire TV in the free Fire TV channels app. Thanks for listening today to Locked On Sabres and making a part of your first listen every day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.